Susan is an attorney with Cullen, Weston, Pines, and Bach, a great sponsor of the summit. Susan is a member of our board of directors. She is a wonderfully knowledgeable person, and we're very excited to have her moderating this final panel. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have a great panel assembled here, all representatives of different technologies in the renewable energy industry. In the morning session, you all had an opportunity to hear some of the perspectives from representatives of utilities on their visions for the utility of the future. In this session, in part, our panelists are going to be talking about the private sector perspective on what's either driving or in some cases holding back market growth in the renewable energy industry. And also they'll talk about the roles that they see for utilities, private industry, and public policymakers in our clean energy future. With that, I'm going to introduce the panelists. After those introductions, I will be lobbing some broad questions at our panelists. We have, I think, a couple of slides to sort of show the current state of the renewable market in Wisconsin, and we're hoping it'll be a very interactive exchange. We will have an opportunity for you all to ask questions of any or all of our panelists. We're going to reserve that to the end of the presentation, but feel free to make note of your questions as we go along. First, immediately to my left is Chris Kunkle. Chris is Regional Policy Manager for Wind on the Wires. He covers the states of Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, all different states with a variety of different issues in renewable energy. Chris represents and advocates for the interests of the wind energy industry before various state legislatures and their executive branches. Next to Chris is Steve Dvorak. Steve founded DVO, which is an environmental engineering firm, in 1989. DVO is now the largest anaerobic digester company in the United States. It has designed and installed over 100 digesters in 18 states in this country, and also has expanded abroad, installing systems in Canada, Chile, China, and Serbia to date. And these systems turn a wide variety of organic wastes into energy. Next to Steve is Adam Bessie. Adam is Vice President and leader of H&H Solar Energy Services based here in Madison. He helps commercial, residential, utility, and consulting customers from project conception through fully functional renewable energy systems. He has wide experience with a variety of technologies and has managed over 250 projects using solar electric, solar hot water, and small wind. Next, last but not least, at the end of the panel there is Amy Hart. Amy is a senior manager of public policy with Sunrun Incorporated, which is the leading national residential rooftop solar financing and installation firm. Amy works with the Alliance for Solar Choice and advocating strong solar policy across the Midwest. And some of you may know Amy from one of her previous gigs, most recently as the Sustainable Project Manager with the Milwaukee Office of Environmental Sustainability. With that, our first question for the panel, and I'm going to move aside here because I believe Mr. Kunkle here will have some slides to accompany his answer. But the first question for the panelists to address deals with the market outlook and top trends in renewable energy. All of us have probably seen media coverage about innovations and new business models that are driving progress and productivity in renewable energy. We'd like the panelists to tell us about the current market outlook and the top trends that they're seeing in their sectors for renewable energy, both in Wisconsin and regionally. So I'll have Chris take over the podium here briefly.
Thank you, Susan. So I asked our friends at AWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, to throw together just a couple of very quick slides that I think will help demonstrate the status of the wind industry. in the United States. It really is sort of difficult to have that understanding if you only look at Wisconsin of sort of what is going on nationally. It's unfortunate Wisconsin hasn't built a utility scale wind farm since 2011. The status of the wind industry as a whole has never been better. Right now, 2014 and 15 were both great years for construction. Right now, there's a record amount of wind under construction. And this is as of the end of the third quarter of 2015. We is going to be releasing their new numbers actually next week for the end of the year. But that's just to give folks a sense of sort of where we stand regionally, and again, Wisconsin has been stuck at that 648 number for a while now. And this is just to underscore that point again, this is where projects are being constructed today. And again, Wisconsin is the only state in the Midwest not building a wind farm right now. And you can attribute that to a lot of different things. But in reality, it's a little unfortunate, given the biggest trend that we see in wind right now is on pricing. This is information from the Department of Energy right here that shows real power purchase agreement prices that were executed in the last couple of years. And of course, 2012, 13, and 14, these all have the PTC that folks are familiar with for wind energy, which helps drive down that price. And again, that tax credit was just recently extended. So we're confident that prices are going to stay at that level, the mid 20s right now for a megawatt hour of wind. When you compare that to other resources that are out there, that's as cheap as it gets. And we're starting to see utilities, again, not necessarily in Wisconsin, but in other states. You heard it from Ms. Irwin at Excel this morning, seeing this and saying, well, why wouldn't we be investing in that right now? That's the cheapest thing we can do, and especially when you look at it compared to that growing gray shaded area of projections for natural gas prices. If we end up on the bottom of that in 2030, 2040, maybe not so big of a deal. But if we end up on the top end and we don't have any of that stuff at the bottom that's helping to hedge against that, that's problematic for customers. And so we're continuing to see utilities view wind as a hedge against that volatility and providing a real value for their customers for that. I want to drive down a little bit more closely on the next trend that we really see, which is continued demand, driven in the next couple of years, I think, continue to be driven by the PTC and just that dirt cheap price until demand picks up for the clean power plant. We heard a little bit about that earlier. We see the CPP as just being a huge market opportunity for wind. States, of course, have a ton of flexibility in how they comply with it. There's nothing saying you must build wind, but when you look at it as a state is trying to come up with figure out what is that compliance solution, we see wind as playing just a primary role in that, and then using other resources to fill in the gaps. So this is just some projections from OWIA of what the least cost compliance options are, what that means for megawatts of wind in these different regions. Now you look at the Great Lakes states, 30 gigawatts, that's a lot of wind, and that's probably all not going to get built in those states. It'd be really tough to build 30 gigawatts of wind in those states. So what you'll see, I think, is a lot of that shift over to the center part of the country and just continue to see export from those areas into these markets. And even further, I want to drive into the demand that we see for the opportunities that we see for Wisconsin. So again, this is modeling that OWIA has put together and trying to figure out what the least cost compliance options are for the state of Wisconsin. They plug in a whole bunch of different variables, and it spits out a set of, a range of megawatt build out for the state. And again, I'll really hammer on this is their projection for the least cost option. You're seeing a range between 1,800 and 3,200 megawatts of wind. Demand for that. Not all of that will be built here. But that's real opportunities to double, triple, even quadruple the amount of wind that we have in Wisconsin. And so we see that as just a huge opportunity as we continue to push away from more carbon-intensive resources. We see wind as just being a solution for that under the Clean Power Plan. So, yeah, a lot of really exciting things happening right now. You just can't really see it until you step out of Wisconsin.
Thanks much, Chris, for setting the stage there for us. We'd like to hear from the other panelists on the view of the current market trends from their sector. Any of you like to take the floor?
Good afternoon. I guess from the standpoint of biogas and anaerobic digesters, what you said.
Is it on?
Is it on now?
Hello? All right, now it's on.
There we go. From the standpoint of anaerobic digesters and biogas, I'd have to echo what was said. We're seeing a lot of interest in anaerobic digesters. It continuously fluctuates. For example, we didn't really do a lot in California. There's very few digesters being built in California on the egg side. Very few being built on the industrial side. They just had a law change, mandated anaerobic digesters, biogas, mandated. That is part of the renewable energy portfolio. And Wisconsin right now leads the nation in digesters. That won't last very long. California will take this over really quickly. So we're seeing less in Wisconsin, if any, but outside the state we see quite a bit. Worldwide, I travel a lot. We're doing a project right now in South Korea. We're just finishing up one in Serbia and one in China. It's amazing what those countries are doing for renewable energy we don't even think about. It's kind of depressing to be an American citizen, but that's what we're seeing.
Thanks. Yeah, I could echo the same thing for solar. A lot of people would have held Wisconsin up. I think we were like 49th out of 50. If you would check 2014, and everybody's saying our policies are very aggressive and not a lot of growth and support, and it's not what we see in the state. Maybe what you see in the news, and there was a lot of great public fights and good, interested rate case stuff, but 2015 was completely opposite. You saw utilities flip to a more supportive model. You had residential customers that really didn't care what the utilities would say their values were. You had great policy advocates to stand up for things to be fair or not have a regressive cost to solar generation to what is reflected in construction. You've got 7 megawatts went on this year, so we're at 22 megawatts in the state of Wisconsin where people say that the sun doesn't really work. You've got utilities, municipal co-op, investor-owned utilities pushing for policy to where we're going to, 22 megawatts will be a small piece by the end of next year, in my impression. So overall, great opportunity in the state of Wisconsin. Regional partners, a lot of folks hold up Minnesota as really forward policy thinking. Their policies forward thinking, but they're not having even the same now mature market gains that you're seeing in Wisconsin. It's kind of regressive. So it's refreshing to see, for sure. Something to get very excited about. It means a lot for new business opportunities, new innovative business models that you see from many of the sponsors up here, or new companies that you didn't even know of 3 or 4 years ago that just got listed doing large-scale construction, development, good business models and community partnerships with the City of Milwaukee, countless nonprofit institutions that are all working together to try to get clean, sustainable generation of things. Can't echo it enough.
I think just the one thing I would add on where the market is at for solar in the region and across the country is certainly the Midwest stands to benefit tremendously from the investment tax credit being extended. And it's interesting to hear from a variety of senators and congressmen talk with bipartisan support of that legislation to make sure that the market isn't just 5 states in the U.S., that it can be 30 to 40 states and customers having access to that clean power. And as I'll talk probably a little bit in depth about how we got the ITC at the end of the day, because it did take collaboration and working with a variety of partners, but it took a lot of you, most of you in the room, and I want to thank Renew and MREA for helping to spread the word. That's what it takes for any of these fights or opportunities. And so the ITC, it has a phase out over the next 5 years down to 10% permanent for a business tax credit. Part of it was just trying to create a level playing field. And for me, I felt very strongly making sure that we do have the opportunity to have markets and customer choice like other states and on the coast. For the West Coast and the East Coast has an opportunity for solar. I think one of the other trends that we've seen in building, so Sunrun works specifically in residential rooftop solar. So that's sort of my main focus and perspective. One of the trends that we've seen is that bipartisan support for economic development and what are those benefits of solar. And while we hear about the battles in dozens of states by utilities to try to shut down those options, we are seeing the idea of the jobs that come with renewable energy development and the energy choice that comes with rooftop solar is really winning out at the end of the day. It's becoming a message. South Carolina, this last year, Sunrun entered the market into a state that nobody would think would be a leader for renewable energy. Governor Nikki Haley and the supermajority of Republicans unanimously passed net metering for the first time. They allowed third-party owned rooftop systems and created a methodology of how they're going to look at the value of solar moving forward. And so they have a market. And basically overnight that happened. We have Governor Chris Christie, who's running for president, who expanded net metering in New Jersey, recognizing that that's an economic benefit. So that's one of the trends that I want us to keep in mind as far as what's possible in the Midwest. We're seeing it in a number of other states like Michigan and Indiana, where we've got really good support in what's possible here in Wisconsin.
Thanks, Amy. That gives us a really good segue into the next question. We'd like the panelists to talk about how the market outlook in their part of the industry can be improved. So specifically, what are some of the barriers, whether they're technical or economic or financial or geographic perhaps, and what kinds of state, federal, or local policy changes could further drive the markets? What kinds of policies exist right now that, if removed, could create new opportunities, etc. So I believe Steve is going to take the lead with answering this question.
Well, that's obviously a very broad question. From the anaerobic digester business, we're seeing different states handle it differently. We've seen some changes in our state. Biogas can, of course, produce electricity, and I think most of you are aware of that. But also, we have sites that were producing CNG, compressed natural gas. We have one site that's going to be going to LNG, liquefied natural gas. So there's some options there that we can do. Typically, compressed natural gas is going to be a larger site. It's going to take a lot of input material. We're seeing that the growth in the digester market is primarily where people are valuing not only the energy but the other aspects of it that you get with a digester. We have some states, quite frankly, where if you're an new animal operation and you're of significant size, you're going to have to put in a digester because of the odor aspects that we can do. So it's not really a renewable energy that's pushing that in some ways. It's odor removal, and we've had some of those in Wisconsin. There's some dairies, for example, in Wisconsin, that had put digesters in. We're getting, if you listened to Mary Powell this morning, their utility is putting in a digester for 3 dairy farms in St. Albans, Vermont. It's going to take the waste from all 3. I'm happy to say that it's our digester system that they chose to do that, but the truth of the matter is that what's important is that they're trying to get economies of scale by putting 3 into 1, trying to work on the interconnection costs and so forth, that it's cheaper to do that. Sometimes interconnection costs are very high in this industry, and by doing that, they're getting some economies of scale. What's also interesting about that is that part of our responsibility is that we're required to remove up to at least 40% of the phosphorus. So you have a utility owning a project that wants to remove 40% of the phosphorus. St. Albans, Vermont digester project. And St. Albans is right on Lake Champlain, which we know what algae is, and they know what algae is. So it's kind of interesting why they're doing it, but they are doing that, and I give them credit for that. So we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of reasons to put them in. It does vary. California, as I mentioned before, is really being aggressive right now. They have some odor problems. If you go into San Joaquin Valley, they've got some odor problems with all their waste. We're seeing on the East Coast, Massachusetts, for example, just passed a law that made mandatory food recycling. You cannot put food in landfills anymore, waste food. So why would you do that? There are 9 landfills in the state of Massachusetts. In 2 years, they want to be down to 3. If you think it's hard to put a new dairy in Wisconsin, or if you want to put in anything like that in the state, try to put a landfill in. That's not easy to do either. So if you can take 40 to 50% of your total material out of a landfill by putting it in a digester, making energy out of it, makes some sense in that situation. So that's what they're doing. So we're in the process of putting in digesters in Massachusetts that have nothing to do with animals. Literally nothing to do with animals. They're going to be primarily manufacturing waste, organic waste from manufacturing plants. Ocean Spray Cranberry is headquartered very close to where we're going to have a plant. They're going to have a lot of food waste all the way from New York City, might be coming up to this site. So some of that is happening. We're also seeing a lot of substrates. I would say that of our digesters, and we're a little over 90 sites right now, probably 60% of them take in outside waste. So if you have a farm and you have a digester, you're taking in cheese waste. You're taking in packing house waste from the slaughter plant. You're taking in pharmaceutical waste. We have a site in Indiana that is producing 5 megawatts of power. Their number 1 supplier is a pharmaceutical company that grows amoxicillin and penicillin on molasses-based material. Molasses-based materials biodegrade really nicely in the digester. So we're doing some of those things, and that's making the industry go. That's our future, I think.
Thanks, Steve. Why don't you pass down to our solar folks there again? Again, kind of barriers to expansion in your area.
Most of it would be challenges in the state of Wisconsin are things are getting larger. As costs are coming down, you run into some of the battles that came about in 2014 of what is that value from a metering standpoint. Changes in net metering policy and then variability throughout the state of Wisconsin on a residential basis. You can have my property, I live right on the border of Alliant Energy and We Energies. They have drastic net metering policies, so if you work with one versus another, a customer has a big education gap to try to get to what those energy savings mean to them. The other pieces are value to a utility. So you have the solar gardens, the community solar gardens out there, and to a co-op, it's a different power value than to a municipal utility, than to an investor-owned utility, and that's somewhat wrapped in our regulatory policy on how our Public Service Commission, as well as other regulatory bodies, would view the value of solar production. So we now have utilities wanting to push into the utility of the future or find ways to fund and finance these, but they're still bound by somewhat restrictive or challenging values for that solar production, because we don't have large-scale utility solar to look back and say, yes, this is the value that it truly means. So there's a regulatory barrier trying to get those pieces moved forward. The other pieces would in helping utility interconnection and interconnection applications, as well as requirements, have that be clear and defined, because most of the time they never had to deal with it. It was either 5 megawatt wind or 20 kilowatt solar, and the gray area now that they're running into daily, having good information accessible to your construction community, to your solar development community, so that the appropriate and safe equipment can be put in and effective costs are communicated to customers. But all things that are signs of a growing and maturing market, and having good collaboration between all the parties that are there at the table.
I'll just take a few minutes to talk about a few items that I think would help to build and all of them relate to creating a stable policy and a stable regulatory environment, which at the end of the day, that's what we need, is to make sure it's predictable for business development and growth. I think the first one, and just briefly touching on the We Energy's rate case and the fixed charge, or the demand charge, it's technically a capacity charge, that was proposed on solar customers, that was overturned in the courts through the Alliance for Solar Choice and Renew Wisconsin. We argued that there wasn't anything in the record that justified why the commission made that decision, keeping in mind it's the Public Service Commission, right, to keep the public interest in mind. At the end of the day, what the Public Service Commission could do, because this question may be coming up again, so we need to make sure we all pay attention. But what the commission can do is learn from other states and learn from other commissions. So in Arizona, for example, a number of investor-owned utilities continued to come to the commission saying, we want to add this fee on solar customers. We want to add X fee. They all came with different proposals. Finally, the commission said, okay, we're going to pause. We're going to do our own study. So we need to make sure, if there's going to be a conversation about what are the costs and what are the benefits of distributed generation in Wisconsin, that's an independent study. That's something that's brought into a rate case that's funded either by a solar industry, by a solar company, or by a utility. That's not the way we want to do it in Wisconsin. We want to make sure that it's an independently led, commission-reviewed study through a stakeholder process that develops that methodology. So I think that's something we need to be working towards, so we have that framework moving forward and we're not just reacting to accusations and unfounded accusations from utilities. And so I think and something to keep in mind, every commission-led study that's been done in the country, every independent commission-led study has shown rooftop solar is a net benefit to ratepayers, lowers the cost to other ratepayers. That's the story that we can tell. And those are commissions in Nevada, ironically enough. Nevada and Mississippi, these are not, Maine showed a huge benefit as well, but it's not just the Maines, the Vermonts, the California commissions. It's Mississippi, Nevada, any of those that have been done. So that's what we need to push for on the regulatory level this year. We also, last year at the summit, and I know a number of people continually talk about the need to clarify the policy on third-party owned systems and leasing systems. We need to have more financing options for our customers in Wisconsin, and just getting that clarified however that ends up happening. I think if that happens in the near term, I think that would be huge for Wisconsin. And then I think focus on energy. We can learn a lot from Congress, ironically enough, from the ITC, and the fact that they said, okay, we want an extension, but there will be a phase out. It's not going over a cliff. And a number of individuals and a number of stakeholders recognize the danger of having incentives in January, not having incentives in July. I think that's happened to several people in the room. And so making sure that if we're going to have business incentives one year and we're going to have businesses that benefit at the bottom line, and they're touting how great solar is for their competitiveness, that opportunity is available the next year, and it's currently not available. So having this long-term plan, even if the idea is to eventually ratchet down, let's have that conversation, but don't hamstring the industry in the meantime.
one of the biggest challenges for wind in Wisconsin is, I sort of see two things. One is around siting. Everybody, I think, here is pretty familiar with that fight over the last few years, and certainly Renewable has just been a fantastic voice for stable regulatory policy from a siting perspective. But that applies both, I think, to siting wind farms and siting transmission lines as well, which is very important. Because if you can't build that stuff here, it's going to make, for example, new natural gas that much more appealing for a utility. And if you're concerned about carbon, that's setting, it might be less than coal, but you're still setting a ceiling for what you can do, because your customers are going to be paying for that for a long time. Which gets into the second point, is a lack of, can I say this, political will really to push utilities in Wisconsin. We heard about the RPS earlier today from the utility panel, and how that was sort of helpful in changing the discussion a little bit, pushing utilities. But let's not forget that Wisconsin has one of, if not the lowest RPSs in the entire country. Certainly it was one of the first states to enact one, and that, again, did a good job in starting that conversation, but, we're getting past on that front as well. And so there's been just a general lack of demand in the last, 5 or 6 or 7 years from utilities to go out and purchase wind. Part of that is, over the last 10 or 15 years, the Public Service Commission has approved like $4 billion worth of coal plant upgrades or something. Somebody has to pay for that. That's going to be, because of those approvals, those decisions, ratepayers are on the hook for those investments for a long time, which again just leads to less need for new resources. If you're not going to retire the old dirty plants, there's just less demand for that. So I think it's those two are the biggest hurdles right now.
Well, I think the panelists talked quite a bit about policy and policy changes that could improve the climate, so to speak, for renewables in Wisconsin. Just to focus those thoughts and perhaps help in setting some priorities, we're going to ask the panelists if they were emperor for a day. Just one day is all you get. What's the top policy or program that you would either enact or repeal to foster further economic development in your industry?
I think we did benefit greatly from coming after Mr. Tong. I think my emperor for the day move would be to have him be our energy czar. It was hard to chalk this up to a couple of things. I looked at a few that were drivers, and the list I came up with was similar to the utility panel. They mentioned a lot of things like RPS, public policy interest, and diversity of energy resources, and all of it does tie back to a grid of the future, which we just heard a really great summary on. And I think one of the biggest program/policy things as a state and all stakeholders could do is to open up and know the challenge that we have to do. So it takes Public Service Commission, regulatory bodies, utilities, business professionals in the industry, advocacy groups, a platform that we all work together and collaborate and not just beat our heads against the wall, because in 15 years, we saw some really great 15-year plans, but we start running into capacity challenge problems with decommissioning of nuclear power plants and having huge capacity in the Midwest. That what are we going to replace it with? And if we want to replace it with clean new generation, how are we going to do that? And we all live here, we all work here, we all provide services to our communities, so let's work together, have a consistent collaborative policy to find those solutions together instead of just arguing with each other.
I'd have maybe just a little bit to add to that from our perspective. Wisconsin did really well in renewable energy. We always had a demand from utilities to buy the renewable energy. I think give us a fair price. I don't think it was an exorbitant price, but it was a fair price. We, quite frankly, got used to 7 or 8 cents. We're now being told that we should get used to 3 to 4 cents. It's a lot harder to do that. Main reason is that we're being told that they have their supply of renewable energy depleted. They did that by getting it from Canada, getting it from Iowa. That was a change in our state policy. It didn't have to come from the state. Because I'd like to see that reversed a little bit. And as a Wisconsin taxpayer and owner, as a business owner, I'd like to see some of that come back to Wisconsin. So I think that would be a help. I think also that there's a big push on across the nation for removing ammonia from the air, for removing greenhouse gases, for removing phosphorus from the lakes. And I'd like to see the renewable energy trading platform go forward. Some people in this audience are working on that very hard, but I think we need some state support on that. And I think Wisconsin is uniquely qualified to lead into that. So I guess some of those things would be advantages to Wisconsin and bring some jobs to the state.
I would be a pretty pragmatic emperor, I think. I would join the calls of a couple of the utilities that you heard earlier today in saying that Wisconsin needs to get to work on figuring out how it's going to comply with the Clean Power Plan. We can't just pretend this isn't going to happen. Whether or not it survives in its full form through the lawsuits or whatever, we can't just pretend that carbon regulations are not going to happen. And Wisconsin utilities, businesses, customers, my members would all be better served if there was a little bit of leadership to say we need to sit down and figure this stuff out. And as emperor, that's precisely what I would do.
I just want to add a few comments to the Clean Power Plan idea, because I think I would agree with you, Emperor. That's going to be really important, and it has a huge opportunity for us in Wisconsin once we get there. Whether it's our state rule, which would be the ideal situation, right? So we can control how we want to comply with the plan versus using the federal rule that will come out. But I also want to make sure that it's an all of the above approach, but all of the above for renewables, meaning that it's when the renewables, that it can be utility owned, can be community solar, and it also can be distributed resources. And so it's all three of those that are going to help meet our goals, and that it's not just rate-based utility scale wind farm or a solar farm at the end of the day. We should all be able to benefit. And I think one of the opportunities for all of us is that we can help. So there's every one of your customers, right, makes a private investment. So if there's a private investment in renewables, utilities should be able to count that towards our goals. The state should be able to count that towards the goals and not just having to rate base everything. So I think there's a really interesting economic argument to be made as we figure out how is Wisconsin going to meet our goal that can actually benefit the distributed generation industry, whether it's solar or wind or biogas.
All right, the last question that the panelists will talk to you about before we open things up for questions here, we're going to ask each of the panelists to look into their crystal balls and tell us from their vantage point what they think the utilities of the future will look like. So we've heard some of those visions from both of our keynote speakers today, but this will be, the renewable industry's perspectives. What kinds of large-scale changes do you see in how energy is generated and delivered to consumers? Amy, I think that's you.
We've heard a lot about, I won't describe kind of what the grid of the future will look like. We heard a lot from Mary and from James about that, because I think there's a lot of agreement, and it's really easy to get all of the stakeholders on the same page of, yes, we're going to see a different grid. When that is, we don't know, right? And different states and different utilities are at different points in that planning. And I think that's just one of the things I wanted to hopefully highlight is we need to make sure that everyone is at the table, right, and it's customer focused at the end of the day of what people want, and we're seeing that continually. People are engaging in rate cases for the first time because they know they want to interact with their energy sources. They want to be able to put solar on their home, and they want to be able to lower their energy bills and control their energy bills. What that means, though, in Hawaii, in their planning process versus Wisconsin, might be two different things. So in Hawaii, 1 in 6 homeowners have solar. In Michigan, for example, is 1/100th of a percent have solar. There's 500 solar customers in northern Illinois. So in all of the Chicagoland area, there's 500 net metered customers. 500 in the entire state of Indiana. So 1 in 6 homes. Now companies are starting to, every company that's working in Hawaii is looking at battery storage systems, how to deploy that to the grid, what are the economics. So there's a push because they're at that point where we can actually start thinking about the grid of the future and what is a rate change, or what changes in rates can be done to meet that. We don't have to leapfrog and go right to Hawaii, right? Until the weather is the same here, we don't need to worry about it. But let's not lose sight of making sure that there's that stable base. So there's our market forces, our actors, the people who are installing solar are going to be that strong backbone for being able to have distributed resources in the future. And if we, for example, Illinois, just south of the border, ComEd is proposing legislating demand charges on all residential customers, saying we need to prepare for the grid of the future. Well, the smart meters haven't been installed yet. We haven't tried time of use rates. They have, again, 500 net metered customers. And so if we leapfrog and we don't allow that smooth transition, there's not going to be that optimizing of the grid of the future and a balanced grid. So I think that's something really important as we start to have those conversations. I don't want to put Adam on the spot, but there are issues like permitting and interconnection that we can work with utilities on here right now to smooth out those issues and make that easier, learn from those mistakes, learn from the other states. New York, during the REV process, a number of people have talked about that process. 2 things happened. One, they said, you know what, during our conversation, we're not touching the policies that are making distributed resources grow. We're not going to touch and think about changing net metering. We're going to leave that, and utilities come in and propose pilot projects with virtual net metering projects. Let's see how this works. Let's see how the grid of the future works without messing with current policy. Iowa did the exact same thing. Iowa just this year issued the results of a study on net metering saying it's really early on, we're not even going to bother spending money on a study of what are the costs and benefits to solar in Iowa because it's too early to tell. But in addition to that, utilities, please come to us with pilot projects and ideas. And I think that's something we can be encouraging as we start to get ready for the grid of the future without getting rid of policies that have worked for developing this market.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. What I've heard from working with a lot of different utility partners over the years, as well as customers, they all want consistent service. They all want to have a great excitement to do their work. And one of the things that I see being more beneficial in the future is having more flexibility to do that. Right now, when you work with utility providers, their hands are tied by the model that they work in, both rate-based or not, and whether their organization is aggressive with non-regulated utility arms. And some use those more aggressively than others to try to address more risky investments to learn, because utilities are trying to learn the same things that would be a more flexible grid future, would be more beneficial to distributed generation sources of all types. One example I can think of is a conversation related to more complex interconnection, control, and relay on larger generation systems. Normally, somebody that's trying to work through that process on the utility side has got to worry about the cost and the infrastructure that's instantly being thrown back to, say, a large digester generator or a large our solar array, as opposed to having a collaborative approach to say, all right, well, could the utility invest in this because this generator is going to be beneficial? That concept that this generator can be good for more than one reason. Digesters are a great example in the Dane County area of water. Are there opportunities for utility investment that they don't have to be concerned about rate base, that they can find ways to make it profitable like a private business would and still make sense for the end customer? That may not just be flat out investment in infrastructure, but it may be tweaking the PPA rate for that digester because they have to recoup the investment that they helped to do on the distribution control side. So there's on a regulatory side, be more understanding of what utilities can or cannot rate base or allow them to do things to mitigate risk of investing. Otherwise, you're open to private business doing it. It's what we see now of one-off, different weird models of trying to do tax equity finances for schools or other projects because you're trying to find a way to work within a regulated utility market and still serve customers with new innovative generation types or have regressive rate policies and structures that don't help foster generation that can be really good and stable for our grid that the utility never even had to invest in outside of watching out for that grid distribution side. And so what I see would be a more flexible service-related grid manager, whether that's the utility or higher level grid operators, but also partnered with private business to get us there so that you can get to something that is a regulated utility market that we live in now that's rate-based and spread across ratepayers to something that is more dynamic, semi-market-based and still allows utilities to provide the stable, safe, and consistent service that supports our state.
I just want to interject here before we give Steve the floor that think about questions that you might have before we get done. Looks like Kyler's on top of that. Great. Okay. Okay, sorry for the interruption, Steve.
Those, I think, are excellent ideas. And I would echo those. I think that we're going to need to have flexible utility. I think Mary Paul this morning outlined that. As somebody who's maybe older, I think we're seeing a change in utilities, a change in the demands that society is placing on them. I think they are going to have to adapt them just like every other industry adapts. Being a monopoly, they can't hold us hostage to something that society does not want. Surprising to me is we are seeing a lot of big companies that want to be provided renewable energy. I'm talking Walmart, I'm talking all the Google cloud services that are being built, 100% renewable energy. If your state doesn't provide that from utilities, they won't come to your state. We don't have any in Wisconsin. There's a lot of them now being built in California because California is allowing the net metering rules to supply energy to those cloud sites. Very clean industry, very high tax-based industry. Shame to miss out on that, to be honest. And that is happening. If you go to the California website for renewable energy, the list of large companies like Walmart, Google, Amazon, and so forth that are looking for that and are willing to pay a premium, same premium that Mary Paul's getting in her Cow Power program for Cow Power out in Vermont. That list is pretty amazing. We don't even offer that. I mean, we just have to start getting to that system. We're going to have to be flexible. If we're not flexible, we'll be left behind. If the Clean Power Program does get passed after all the legal hurdles, I'm certainly not an attorney, don't claim to be one, but if it does get passed, Wisconsin's going to be way far behind. A lot of that clean energy is already leaving the state. If we have to replace some of that, we're going to pay a premium for that. So I think we have to be aware of some of the things that are going on. I think we're just trying to ignore things, but a lot of states are not ignoring that. I know there's 26 or 28 states that are fighting the Clean Power Program. There's also 18 or 20 of the biggest states that are supporting it and actively supporting it. We'll see how it goes, but taking a risk.
I don't have a ton to add to this. The only thing that I'll say is that what we're seeing now in Wisconsin is not working. I mean, something needs to change, I think. But I think that there are certainly ways to do that within a vertically integrated structure. I mean, we see that in Minnesota, with all the good stuff that utilities there are doing, but that's being driven by strong, proactive policymakers and regulators. So I think that there's ways to do it within the current regulatory structure that can help us all, achieve our collective goals. So it doesn't mean the end of the utility industry as we know it tomorrow.
Okay, thanks to all the panelists for sharing their thoughts. We're going to take questions now. Tyler, you're going to...
And I have a lot, and if you have more, please direct them to either Katie or Jenny, and we'll get them over here. So the first one is one of the groups in Wisconsin that's been most difficult to work with on renewable energy has been a group called Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and they typically use a jobs versus environment type of a frame when they talk about this, that, renewables cost more, so that's going to cost us jobs. You're all up there representing industries with thousands and thousands of jobs. Certainly with solar and wind, and in the case of Steve, you know better than anybody else the amount of job creation we can have locally when we build a digester. So I'm going to just give you that little bit of an open forum to each quickly respond to this idea of the jobs versus environment frame and what's going on in your industry. How can you bring jobs to Wisconsin?
So, to me, I think the jobs environment, or the jobs impact is very strong, and I think these guys will be able to do a good job talking about it. I would argue that for the chamber, one of the biggest things that we're going to see is when do some of those large industrials start asking why they're paying more for their electricity than any other state in the region? At what point are we going to come to a head where their utility members and their large industrial members are at odds with one another? Certainly we see that on occasion at the commission here and there, but when you're looking at a market, and we saw the prices earlier that are being executed for renewables today, utility scale solar is not far behind that. When are these folks going to start asking questions about, are you making the right decisions? Are you making the right investments? Are you, all these different things. So I think, the jobs argument is certainly very compelling, but I think the electric rate side is equally important for the chamber.
I guess I agree with that. I think it's regrettable that the chamber takes that position. I think what is missing here is the fact that every person in this room creates waste. It's given. You create waste. You create waste when you eat. You create waste when you go to the bathroom. You create waste in a lot of different ways. And part of society, part of government infrastructures that we must deal with, whether you're talking about the municipal sewage treatment plant, or you're talking about the landfills, or wherever you create waste. That's not going to go away. The only way that goes away is when we die. So if you live with that premise that the wastes are there and we don't want to keep having more landfills and more municipal sewage plants, we have to start doing things. We have to also realize that nobody wants to have more coal plants or whatever to do this. So we have to make a decision where we're going to go as a society. We have to look ahead a little bit. We have an opportunity to create jobs in Wisconsin. We don't do that if we get hydro Canada, but we do if we can do it in Wisconsin, so I think we have to look at that. We all want to live here, we want to have a tax base. So I think the forward-thinking, forward approach is going to be that let's create our own. We have the opportunity to do it. It was mentioned this morning that something like 98% of all the energy dollars leave the state because we really don't have energy in Wisconsin. And that is true. We have no natural gas, we have no coal. So we keep buying it. We don't have to keep doing that. We can create jobs here. And I think that's the forward-looking thing. We need an infrastructure to do it. We need some political support to do it. Other states are doing that. I think we can just watch what they're doing and pick the best. But there are some good models out there. Let's just look at them.
Echo the same comments. Chris had a good one on manufacturing commerce. Is worried about our manufacturing and industry, and you saw all the solar arrays that were put on industrial communities and businesses in the state of Wisconsin just in the last year. There's a hunger and want for it. Our rates are much higher in our industrial manufacturing base, and a lot of it is that, do we want to invest in our state, or do we want to just have a vacuum that takes money out of our industrial manufacturing community and sends it out of the state for unsustainable, non-clean resources? And even if we could get manufacturers and high-tech industry to live in the state, they want to live next to our old power generation sources instead of something that's more innovative, exciting, because it's not just, yeah, you pay your utility bill and this is great and invest in our state. Every dollar that you're putting in for generation, you're allowing your utility to be forward-thinking, doing new business development models and service for their customers. That's more jobs. Those are great jobs. It's not just people putting in solar panels or building digesters and wind turbines. It's no offense to the folks that do that. There's a lot of great jobs that do that, but there's so many other ancillary jobs. I think the number I found last night is 200,000 is the number they throw out for solar jobs, and like 30 or 40 for wind added to it. 600,000 in ancillary services, which is transportation, parts, engineering, all the other things that are conventional employment in our country that are great paying jobs that we're missing out on. They're going to other places, or they're in the state and we have to move elsewhere, go to Serbia to try to do things like that. So I want to be open for business. Let's do business here.
Just one quick thing. I think one thing we can do in the short term is do sort of a public education campaign with our elected officials, with stakeholders, and elected officials at the local level and at the state level, with those companies that aren't not necessarily only the installers, but also that supply chain. When you look at the companies that are in the renewable supply chain in Wisconsin, it blows my mind, whether it's from inverters, component manufacturers. And so really, we need to engage with those companies and make sure that they give tours and that they're seen and the employees are seen. So give time to your employees to go meet with elected officials. Governor Walker in his State of the State earlier this week said he's planning on doing a tour of the state, right, and hearing from residents across the state. That can be one of the things we dedicate ourselves to do, that wherever you're heading back to today, you make sure you, your customers, your employees, go to those listening sessions and say, this is important, and we're here, and these are real jobs that already exist in Wisconsin. And I think that just making sure that it's not pitting baseload employees that work at the power plants versus installers. That's not what this is about, and so making sure that we don't go down that path of rooftop solar isn't going to, we're not out to replace all of the baseload plants. Like We Energies did a great project replacing their coal-fired power plant, the dirtiest one in the state, or replacing it with natural gas. And those are things that are important. We're not necessarily out to replace the base load, and it's not about these employees are going to lose their job because we're adding more employees. It's about making sure there's growth.
Great. The next question is just really for Steve. It's about biogas, and Mary talked about the phosphorus issues in Vermont, and she's deploying digesters to help with that. Can you just give us a little taste, for the benefit of the audience that's not so engaged on those issues? What's the phosphorus situation like in Wisconsin? How can digesters help?
Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to tell you what the phosphorus situation in Wisconsin is.
Maybe at the high level. What are the issues and how can digesters help?
Yeah, it's not great. Well, phosphorus obviously is, from a scientific standpoint, a very essential nutrient. You have to have phosphorus. You and I would not be here if we didn't have phosphorus in our body and if we didn't eat phosphorus. The problem with phosphorus is when you have too much. So it's something that you have to have some. Too much is not any good. Like a lot of things we do. Dark chocolate comes to mind. So really what digesters do is that the waste that we put in the digester has phosphorus in it. Just like what you ate today had phosphorus in it. So if we have cheese whey, if we have cow manure, if we have packing house waste, or if we have a lot of things, even cardboard from manufacturing plants, it has some phosphorus in it. And sooner or later, a lot of that in the past went on our land. And the dairy industry in Wisconsin is kind of unique because it's so large, but it's a wrap for that. We put a lot of manure phosphorus based on our land. And phosphorus does not leach with the groundwater. Phosphorus is not soluble in most cases. So it runs off with the soil. When we have soil erosion, soil runoff, eventually it runs into our stream, eventually runs into Lake Michigan or whatever receiving body it is. And phosphorus is, being an essential nutrient, is an essential nutrient for algae. And that's one of the reasons we have this big algae problem. I live right now between Lake Winnebago and Lake Michigan, so I can tell you that we know algae on both sides of us. What digesters do is, phosphorus is not biodegradable. We can put carbon in a digester and we'll make CH4 and CO2, but we put phosphorus in a digester, we'll make anything from it. It comes right through. What it allows us to do, however, is by separating solids afterwards from a digester, we can make a liquid stream and we can make a solids pile. And because of the nature of phosphorus, we get most of the phosphorus in the solids pile. And we can manage that. There's people that are buying it. You go to a website, look up at Magic Dirt. They're selling cow-based solids into Walmart, and under the name Magic Dirt, it's replacing peat moss. And it's great plant growth because it's got natural phosphorus and ammonia and so forth in it. So really what we're doing is we're not destroying it. We're not doing anything with it. We're putting it in an easily controlled pile, and by doing that, we're taking it basically off the land, which means that sooner or later, we're taking most of what today might go to the rivers or whatever surplus. We're taking that out, we can manage it. So the Wisconsin Department of Ag gives us a lot of benefit in manure management plans that they have. This facility, they can manage their phosphorus better. So it's a management thing.
Great, and we have so many great questions. I'm just going to ask one more. And this is, from your perspectives, how can we as the industry, as advocates, as utilities, organizations, here learning about more renewable energy, we want to see more renewable energy. From your perspective, maybe it's just one thing or maybe it's a couple. But what can we as a collective do to help push forward wind, biogas, and solar in Wisconsin? And that may be at the state level, utility level, municipal level, electing or educating candidates, etc. But just your ideas for how we can best help your industries here over the next year.
I guess I'll lead off. Pretty simple for me. In the 2000s and early 2010, 2012 area, we did really well in Wisconsin. We had a fair rate for the owners. Not looking for a high rate, but I think a fair rate, something in that 8 cents or so forth. We built a lot of digesters in the state. We also have some benefits, as I mentioned before, with the digesters. As an illustration of that, I think one thing that I would like to bring up, maybe just a hair different from your question. I think that maybe you, as an audience, don't realize this, but of the 26 digesters that DBO has built in this state, I would tell you that within the next 5 years, that power purchase agreements that they all received when they built those digesters will end. They're being offered 3 cents. You will have a lot of empty digesters. So the society benefits from having those digesters are going to go away. It takes 2 to 3 cents to run the engines as far as the operation and maintenance. And though the customers are not going to, we have some in this state already that are shut down. We have digesters in this state on large dairies, large factories, not always just dairies, that have digesters. They're running the digester because they like the odor management, they like the nutrient management, they like some of those attributes. And instead of running the engine, they're flaring all the biogas because they can't afford converted electricity. Now, I'm not proud of that. I'm paid. I got my money 10 years ago. But it's not right. And I think we have to change it. So I think we just need to be fair.
I have a very cliched answer, but it is. First of all, it's very important that, I mean, the turnout here, every single year it's getting bigger. It's clearly there's this excitement in Wisconsin, despite maps like that and, you know, just some of the things that you're hearing today about the challenges. Clearly the excitement is there. Everybody here that supports this stuff needs to continue talking to their elected officials at the local level, at the state level. You know, climate, I think, has never been more prevalent. It's very divisive, but with the things that happened in Paris, with the Clean Power Plan, with all these different things it's just very prevalent right now. And we can finally say that we have the technologies today to help address this problem and solve this problem. We need to be educating people about where the technology is today, about what other states are doing, about what other utilities are doing, and start asking questions about why don't we see that here. We don't have to be afraid of the numbers anymore. They're on our side for renewables. We can continue to turn to that. It's not a you know, as Mary was saying earlier, you know, the more expensive option being the green option and vice versa. That's just not the case today, and we need to continue talking to lawmakers. Policy is everything on this, and we need to have a few more leaders step up to the plate in Wisconsin and start asking these critical questions.
I guess keep doing what you're doing. If we learned something really great about utilities pushing regressive policies in 2014 is that when the community speaks, they listen. A business, much like a utility or any other business, is a large organization, and there's differences of opinions. When you put forward one opinion and the entire community that you serve, your customer base, not your ratepayer base, screams at you, obviously they're listening. So amen to public community comments, the Public Service Commission open hearings, newspaper articles, Renew staff, everyone in the state, and the people that keep coming back to this summit. It works. And then now we just have to keep working. So the folks in utilities that are doing the work to try to find ways to make it make sense, keep doing that. Innovative business models, keep pushing, trying to find the ways to do it, and don't be afraid of risk, because right now we can't get our utilities to be risky, but they're listening and they learn. Our regulators and our legislators try to catch up, because we haven't really been doing anything related to energy, and we're missing a lot of really great opportunities. And instead of just saying, well, we don't want to change, is try to help folks that find the innovative ways to do it. Don't be over-aggressive and do things that are not our classic conservative Midwestern nature. However, we can still do some really great forward things. It's not technology, as Chris said. It's just figuring out the right way forward. My greatest example is I'm honored to be up in a panel like this. I'm honored to be part of a great business that does renewable energy. I used to play in Petri dishes and work in fungus and digestion stuff. Like, wow, okay, wait a second. How do you get from there to here? It's you just keep your head on, listen, learn, meet people, and keep pushing. And we can all do that. It's not things we've been doing, but we can do it.
Just to build on to what Adam said, last year was sort of the first time I think we saw this groundswell of individuals who took the time to send the emails, send the letters into the Public Service Commission, to their legislators, going to the public hearings. We're going to need to keep continuing to do that. In Nevada, for example, just sharing a personal story from Sunrun, we had thousands of individuals who have showed up to hearings to testify how they will lose their job, how they just moved to Las Vegas and now they have to hire the moving trucks to leave because their job is not there anymore, and how those decisions are real. And so when the time comes, please be sure to communicate with your customers. We had all of the customers from local installers come out to talk about how they want solar and how their neighbors want to be able to install solar in the future, right? So it's not just about the existing customers, but please communicate with the customers and take the time, allow your employees to do that as well. Like we will need all hands on deck, essentially, to make sure that the utilities are hearing what the customers want, but also that the regulators and the legislators hear as well. And tell your story. I think I was fortunate enough to be at an event last week at Letterhead Press in Waukesha, where not only did Letterhead Press get to tell why they invested in solar, and they got to talk with the Lieutenant Governor, where she talked about the benefits of solar to the bottom line, but she got to hear directly from Letterhead Press of why that's important. She got to hear from Sunpeak about why this is important and why they're investing and hiring people, and how they have hired 3 people. They want to hire 5. They're going to hire 10. So you hear those direct stories. Feel free to reach out to Tyler and all the other folks who work on policy to kind of fill in that gap if you need to, but telling those stories of the decades that some of you have worked on issues here in Wisconsin, or those of you who are new and this is what you want the future to look like. I think those voices are really important, and then just step back and let that happen, right? It is, and let the partnerships happen. I have been in a couple of halls with Chris in lobbying on certain issues over in Minnesota, and the deck is stacked. Like, we can talk about collaborative work. Over in Michigan, there's an energy legislation. There's 69 lobbyists from the utilities working on energy issues. There's 1 from the renewables end. Good thing he works his tail off. But we've done a lot of education on the front end, introducing a lot of the elected officials to what the possibility is for renewables. And while there had been a bill, or while there is a bill that had been introduced to eliminate net metering, and it was introduced by a few Republicans that have ties to the utilities, there are Republicans on the other side in the House that said, you know what, we want to expand net metering. We're going to work to expand it. Not only is this not going anywhere, we want to encourage that because it's energy freedom and it's choice. And so the message gets out there, and let people run with it, and it's great. One of those is the chair of ALEC for Michigan. He said, no, we're going to keep net metering. We like it. And so it happens. It's possible. So we just need to do that education, and I think we have some good opportunities.
I just want to add one more thing that all of you can do, and I realize I'm singing to the choir a little bit, but support Renew Wisconsin. Be a member. If you are already a member, you can be a higher level member. Tell your friends, your coworkers, your employees, open your checkbook. They are the strongest voice for renewable energy in Wisconsin, and we all need to support them.
Well, thanks, Susan. And another board member gave a note to kind of reinforce that. If you were here for lunch and you saw the renewable energy installations that Michael went through, tremendous number of businesses that installed systems, and I can tell you with certainty that a lot of those systems would not have happened without the work of this organization at Renew Wisconsin. Because in 2014, the Public Service Commission was deciding whether they were going to continue rebates in 2015 and 2016, and those rebates are still a critical piece of financing those projects. Letterhead Press had a 5-year payback. They're a manufacturing company. They don't do anything unless they have a 5-year payback or less. Okay, so focus on energy incentive was a key part of getting that down to 5 years. We're just now to the point where businesses can cost effectively do this compared to other internal projects. And I'll tell you that the PSC voted to kill those rebates, to end them entirely. And it was the work of Renew Wisconsin, working with partners, Republicans, to call those commissioners to speak with their staff, and they changed their mind, and they let $8.5 million out in rebates. And those rebates we saw today. We saw today in 31 big projects that happened in the state of Wisconsin. So that's what we're really talking about. Now I'm going to ask Katie to come up. So one final plug for please fill out your evaluations. Okay? And before we give away the Sunjack, I want to personally and also professionally thank Katie Putz for doing basically everything to make this event happen. And also thanks to our intern Mitch. Mitch has been a super help in the office, and he also has great chops with videos, so he's been videoing us all day, and he's going to help make some really nice videos that we can share out with the world from the proceedings today. So thank you so much, Mitch. And with that, everyone's waiting with bated breath. Okay, so get out your blue tickets.